Thank you very much. I'm not sure I'm here to enlighten everyone, but we're here for, I think, two reasons, and I'm very happy to have been invited. I'm very grateful to have been invited by the government of Sweden and by Foreign Minister Wallström for this event, and my friend Annika, the ambassador of Sweden in UNESCO. The way I see it is that we were here to see the crisis of violence against journalism, but especially the violence and harassment of women journalists in the world of today, which is really very tragic. But at the same time, we're here to celebrate. We're here to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the first freedom of expression law and access to public information that came from Sweden as well. And this may sound like a contradiction, because we're here to celebrate that for 250 years the world has had the principle of freedom of expression and access to information as fundamental for a society, although the law only lasted 10 years, but I think it's very important that it was enacted. The craziness of Peter Forskal, a philosopher and activist of his time, who actually leafleted and did a pamphlet with the reasons, fundamental reasons why freedom of expression and access to public information was essential. Imagine what that must have been 250 years ago, before even the French Revolution or the American Constitution or all the other instruments that later talked about liberties and fundamental freedoms. And this was very important. I think Sweden really has the privilege of having stepped at the forefront of this issue. But 250 years later, what we see today is a rise in violence. Minister Wallström said, and there is a report by the Director General of UNESCO every year, we have 827 journalists exactly in our record. There's many more, but in the records, assassinated in the last 10 years, in this decade. 60% of them, yes, have been in countries in armed conflict, like we see today in Syria, tragically. But 40% have been in countries that are not in armed conflict. And this is even more preoccupying. None of the deaths are justified, nor in conflict nor in non-armed conflict. But certainly it draws attention that almost half of the killings, of the 40%, are in countries that are supposed to be democratic nations. And they still have a tremendous degree of violence. And last year was the highest level of violence. So it means that the situation is deteriorating. And on top of that, we're getting further and progressively reports of an increase of violence against women with sexual harassment, with sexual connotation, which is the testimonies of these brave and wonderful, valiant women that we were listening today, which is very moving to see the amount of women around the world doing this type of work beyond these circumstances and beyond this reality. There have been 8 resolutions in the United Nations in general, from the General Assembly to the Security Council, 2 in the Security Council on situations of conflict, the last one proposed by France and Greece, the 2222. There has been one presented last year in UNESCO and several others, but one last year by Sweden, which was very good, very comprehensive, which supports the work that we do as the communication information sector of UNESCO to enhance the safety of journalists. And there was one more recently, a few months ago, month and a half, 2 months ago, at the Human Rights Council, proposed by Austria and 90 more co-sponsors, some of them observers, of course, of the Human Rights Council. So this is an important phenomenon. This issue is being recognized in the world. Everyone looks at the violence against journalists as a crucial issue. And today, Sweden is making us look at the violence against women journalists. This is why I love the phrase I heard from Minister Wallström, and I also heard from our ambassador in UNESCO, that Sweden is the one country that has a feminine foreign policy, which I think is a very beautiful concept and very important to maintain. So in this way to look at the situation, what should we interpret? What can we think? So many resolutions of United Nations and the violence increasing. This is because I think, in a way, journalism is having more of an impact. It is true that internet has come to weaken some of the smaller written newspapers, and it is, in a way, provoking a crisis in terms of labor stability for journalists. This is real. It is the transition of a new technology. But it's also true that with internet, the word is going further, and it is more powerful. When I left my country of origin, which is a funny name like Frank la Rue, but I actually come from Guatemala, and I left Guatemala into exile in the 80s because of the dictators, the General Rios Montt, who was the dictator then. We took 3 days. I remember one of the massacres that occurred in the highlands against the Mayan population. We took 3 days to find out in the city of Guatemala that it had happened. Today, we can find out in seconds of a tsunami that hits a town in eastern, in the South Pacific, in the eastern part of the world. Or we can see the earthquake in Haiti in seconds because someone will come with their phone and take a photograph and inform us. This is the power of journalism. And investigative journalism is working. I think the strength of these women, the reason why they're being threatened is because they are strong and they are powerful and they are having an effect in public opinion, which is why those that are engaged in corruption and those that are authoritarian leaders and those that fear for what they're doing because they know it's immoral or it's a violation of human rights, those are the ones that are using repression against them and try to instigate harassment and threats and all forms of opposition to silence them. This is the phenomenon today. We're becoming more powerful in communication, but those that are doing the wrong things are becoming scared. So what do we do? I think in the world, the world moves, I always say, history moves always forward. We never really go back, but we move in waves. And I do think we are in a downturn of the wave. We are going through a period of depression, of violence. And this is important to recognize. And we have to react. We must not allow this to happen. So we're trying to engage. From UNESCO, we have been doing this since 2005, but to engage in the UN Plan of Action for Safety of Journalists. And this plan of action tries to engage not only UN agencies, to the extent that we can build coordination, we try to engage the state authorities of all the member states, and we try to engage civil society. I just recently began in UNESCO. I used to be a rapporteur of freedom of expression in Geneva, but it's very interesting because we're trying to build a new dynamism in this, precisely responding to the challenge. And the new approach that we have is to look at the new framework of United Nations, the 2030 Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals. We have always talked about freedom of expression and freedom of the press as a human right. Not only human rights of the journalists who are expressing themselves, but it's also a human right exercised by society, because we all have a right to be informed. And if journalism is affected, our right to information is limited. And then we cannot build our minds, build our opinions, and we cannot participate as citizens freely. And this is what's important. So, number one, it's a violation of rights. Number two, it's a weakening of democracy. But today, with the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, Goal 16 says that to build a society that can reach development, we need to establish societies in peace, inclusiveness, men and women, and all ethnic minorities, with access to justice, with transparency, and it says at the end, and with public access to information. This public access to information means a free press. It means many other things as well, but initially a free and safe press. There cannot be freedom of the press without safety of journalists. So this is the challenge we're putting forward today. To all the states of the world, every single state should have a mechanism of safety in order to reach development. So it's also a development goal. It's a human rights goal, a democratic goal, and a development goal. This is a little bit our logic and how we can build this recognition. There is now a group of friends of states, but we call them the Group of Friends of Safety of Journalists. Sweden is part of it. We have the same group in UNESCO, of course, but we have it in New York and we have it in Geneva. So we have a consistency in these same actors in all three venues. We have international NGOs participating with us, Article 19, CPJ in New York, RSF from France, IPI, and other different institutions, IMS, different big NGOs, but also local NGOs that are participating. We want to network with everyone. And this is a little bit our proposal. If we really build consciousness and if we really build strength, people will not feel alone. As our colleague from Russia was saying, the most important element initially is the moral support, to build the strength together. But also the most important issue is to challenge policies that allow harassment to exist. States should be responsible of now allowing. And yes, we are in a world, and this is the other part, yes, we are in a world in crisis, where there is an economic crisis of journalism because of the economic models being affected by internet. There is a crisis of harassment and violence we have now seen, but there is also a crisis of credibility. If you look at the Brexit, if you look at the rise of the far right, the extremist groups, the neo-Nazis, the white supremacists, in my Latin America, the strength of the organized crime that can buy off authorities and judges, all this is growing. And this is also allowing them to silence us and to silence the press. So this is the moment when we should also react, because it is precisely against this sort of swing in certain elections, in certain big countries, where the candidate who wins the elections was challenging the press for being liars, and he still wins the elections. So there's also a credibility question by the press that we have to acknowledge. We're convening a reflection with journalists next year to discuss also that there is a new challenge. We have to revamp our image and our position, and there is a challenge of new ethics and new activities with journalism. This is the world of today. But the first issue we have to guarantee is the safety of journalists. No more threats and harassment, and especially no more sexual harassment and abuse of women, nor physically, nor verbally, nor by internet or any other form. This is an important sort of position that we want to move the world to. And I really think that this is the best way we can honor this anniversary of the 250th anniversary. Sweden is playing an important role in this, but I think all of us should play a very important role in this. And I think there is a sense of hope, because part of my message, I would say, is that we recognize the value of the testimony of all the brave women that are suffering today because of the brave and good work they do, but we also feel strong out of their strength, and we share that strength they have to think that things can change. And if we all join forces and we all basically try to integrate a global plan of action, we could succeed in guaranteeing safety of the press, and through that guaranteeing our exercise of human rights, democracy, and development. Thank you.